Welcome to the Redevelopment Expert Exchange's April webinar, Right on Track, Train Depot Redevelopment. We have some great panelists lined up for you today. We're going to hear from a couple of ongoing Train Depot projects from across the state. My name is Carrie Staten. I am the Associate Director of the Brownfields Assistance Center at WVU. And this program that we've just started that is helping to educate our stakeholders across the state and the region on all the different issues that you may encounter in redevelopment. So just some housekeeping things before we get started. We do have 3 panelists today, so we've got a full agenda. I have all of our participants are on mute, and so if you have any questions at any point during their presentations, you can use either the questions or the chat box in your sort of menu options, and I will be able to see all of those, and I will keep an eye out, and if we're able to, we can interrupt people while they're speaking, and then we'll have some time to take several questions at the end as well. As I said, this is a part of the Redevelopment Expert Exchange, and the mission of the exchange is to provide redevelopment experience sharing opportunities between West Virginia communities. So we do that through a couple of ways. The first way is through peer-to-peer exchanges, where we take members of one community to a different community because they have similar projects to learn from each other. So just this week, I took a group from Weston to Lewisburg. Weston has a dilapidated building that they're interested in turning into some sort of a performance art community center similar to Carnegie Hall in Lewisburg. And so the folks at Lewisburg were kind enough to host us and answer a lot of our questions and give us a tour of their building and share the history of their project that will hopefully help the folks in Weston as they plan for their project. And then the second thing that we do is this series of webinars. We have monthly webinars on special topics. Those happen usually at the end of each month. We don't yet have May scheduled yet, but as soon as we do, you guys will get an email about that, and I hope you'll be able to join us. If you'd like to suggest a webinar topic, or if you'd like to request one of those peer-to-peer exchanges, you can do that at our website, wvredevelopment.org/redevelopment expert exchange, and that link does work. These slides and a recording of the presentation today will be available at that same website probably early next week, and I will send an email out with whenever that is live so that you can get to it whenever you need to. And then another program of the Brownfields Center, every year we partner with the Brownfields Assistance Center at Marshall University to host a statewide Brownfields conference where we really get in depth on topics like these, and you can interact in person and learn from each other and from experts from around the United States. This year is our 11th conference. It's September 6th through the 8th in Charleston at the Charleston Marriott. On the 6th, we'll have some pre-conference mobile workshops where we'll be traveling to some different brownfield redevelopment sites within the community of Charleston, so that'll be really exciting. We're going to head to some sites in downtown Charleston to get a feel for that downtown revitalization piece. We're going to have a tour that goes out to Freedom Industries for a more industrial, traditional brownfields experience. And then there's actually the new Girl Scouts headquarters in Charleston is on a brownfield, and we'll be doing a tour there. And then on the 7th, we'll have several great sessions on a number of topics that are specifically focused on West Virginia projects and West Virginia communities. And then for the first time, on September 8th, we're partnering with folks out of Kentucky and the EPA regions, Virginia, Tennessee, to host the first Central Appalachian Regional Brownfield Summit. And there will be a lot of topics that are very relevant to West Virginians, but that are also relevant to our neighbors just around us. And you can find more information on that conference at the Brownfields website. And registration for the conference should be launching in early May. So that's my spiel. We're going to get right into the Train Depot redevelopment. We have some folks from Webster Springs and Berkeley Springs who are going to tell us their story. First up, we have Geary Weir, and then he'll tell you about the Webster Springs project. And then Sally Marshall and John McCracken will tell us about the Berkeley Springs Depot story, and we'll take questions. As I said before, you can type your questions at any point. I'll be watching for them. And then we also can take some more at the end. So as things occur to you, go ahead and type it in, and I promise we will get to it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Geary and let him tell you about the Webster Springs Depot.
Good morning, everyone. times when you watch these things, you learn from other people about how to do something. I think my presentation is more going to be showing you some things that went wrong and how not to do them, but hopefully you'll learn from some of our mistakes. I wanted to go through some slides first just so you have a visual idea of what we did. This was the picture of the depot before we began the project. You can see a dilapidated building property that was overgrown. Can move on to the next slide. The property had been used illegally as a dump site, tires. Next slide. Other debris. Sometimes people would have bonfires, again illegally and uninvited. So the property was quite a mess. You can see the building itself inside, just in terrible condition. It was not secured. Children or people could get into the building, and it was very dangerous in there. The floor was bad. You could see possibly in this picture, and I think in the next one, where the roof is collapsing. Water, snow, everything else could get into the building, so it was really in really bad shape. Okay. To begin the restoration, of course, we had to clean up the surrounding the property so we could get to the building in the first place. Okay. Again, the building was in pretty bad shape. Water and snow had entered the building. It was pretty much on the verge of collapse. So one of the first things we had to do was pretty much dismantle a good bit of the building. Almost anything that wasn't brick or concrete had to be removed and disposed of. Okay. We're getting down to the point where you can see that there was not a whole lot left other than the walls and some of the basic foundation and structure of the building. Began renovation. The first phase was securing the exterior of the building. We didn't have enough money to do the entire building, so we focused on roof, windows, doors, things like that, so that the property, the building, could be protected from further damage. And here you can see getting close to the completion of the first phase of the building. This is a slide from several years ago for a presentation that was done. It's great to redevelop a property and fix up a blighted, deteriorated building, but what are you going to do with it? So, you know, we set down some goals, some things we wanted to focus on, and that is really maintained throughout the process. As things have changed, we've still held to this goal of what we want to do next. Okay. Here again you can kind of see a before and after picture, and actually the picture on the right is from a couple of years ago, but it doesn't look too much different now. We've done interior renovations since that time, but you can see quite a difference in the before and after. Next slide. Okay, now I'll start on the process of where we've been and how we got to where we are today. The project originally started in 2002 as part of a multi-million-dollar development plan called Woodchoppers Village. At that time, there was no consideration given to the potential for contamination in the area, even though the previous usage for the site had been a railroad freight depot and a sawmill at one time. There were public meetings held. The Woodchopper Village project was well received by local citizens, but it really languished due to a lack of funds for development. This was a some $20+ million project that was envisioned. And honestly, realistic plans for development and ongoing operation were never really conceived quite right. But part of the Woodchopper Village plan included procurement of a transportation enhancement grant for the renovation of the depot building, which was to be used as a visitor center and operations center for the Woodchoppers Village. The grant went unused for several years, and the West Virginia DOT began to make plans to withdraw the commitment of the funds. So we, in 2008, with an assistance from a Flexi grant, developed a new plan for the area. which included redevelopment plans for the adjacent Bakers Island recreation area. The new Bakers Island master plan was smaller in scope than the Woodchopper Village plan. Again, we had a series of public meetings to gather input to see what the community's desires and dreams were. And I want to emphasize that because to do these kind of projects without allowing the community input is really a mistake. You really need to get the backing. That way, as time goes on, if things do go wrong, there's not so much pressure from the community to that they weren't involved in the first place. So you want to get them behind you in the first place. The new plan, the Bakers Island plan, drew elements from the previous Woodchopper Village plan, but was modified to consider some realistic funding possibilities, development costs, and ongoing maintenance and operation issues. At that time, the process was begun for the town to purchase the old depot property, and that's when the environmental concerns became known. There was an initial assessment completed by the DEP that showed some level of environmental contamination on the property surrounding the building. In 2009, an EPA target brownfield assessment funds were obtained, and a remedial action plan was developed. And then finally, in 2010, fortunately, DOT had not withdrawn the grant money from the original 2002 Transportation Enhancement Grant yet. So with those funds and local matching funds from the town and a donation from a private company, the restoration of the railroad depot building began. The exterior renovations were completed in December of 2010. This included, as you saw in the pictures, stabilization of the building, roof, windows, doors, and related exterior work. Also in 2010, an EPA cleanup grant was applied for, and it was approved in 2011. One of the problems we had due to an underestimation of the costs, and also we had some difficulty in finding a licensed remediation specialist that would work with us under the budget that we had available. So the actual work on the EPA grant didn't begin until 2013. In the meantime, in 2012, a second transportation enhancement grant was approved, and we had to do a lot of the studies again. That was approved, and notice to proceed with construction was received in 2013. This was a smaller grant, a smaller project. Unfortunately, several bids came in significantly over the budget. We had to redesign and rebid the project several times. And finally, the interior construction was begun and eventually completed in 2015. Also in 2015, the EPA grant project was largely completed, and I believe the only step left, we're waiting for the signed certificate of completion from West Virginia DEP's voluntary remediation program. So the use of the property once completed, that has changed since the beginning. We originally envisioned it as a visitor center and operations center for the Woodchopper Village, the plan that was abandoned. Later it was determined it would be a standalone visitor center, but that plan was abandoned when it was determined the town would not be able to afford to staff and operate a standalone center. We came up with a plan then to use this as a visitor center and office for a campground development on the property. And that plan was eventually abandoned when an adjacent property owner decided to develop a campground on the adjoining property. So obviously there was no longer the need for a campground on the depot property. So currently we're looking at, and this is tentative, but the use of the depot building as a visitor center and a trailhead for an ATV trail system, which we're working on developing, which will be modeled somewhat after the Hatfield-McCoy trail system. So what were some of the pitfalls, some of the things that went wrong, and why did they go wrong? Part of it is this is a project that was under the town government, and between 2002 and 2012 we had 5 different mayors. Not all the mayors were excited about the project, and some of them really didn't want to see it brought forward because they didn't care for the previous mayor, and was kind of the previous mayor's project, so there were some starts and stops along the way. The time frame for the project has strung out, as you heard, for over 10 years, and exterior factors and conditions have changed over that time, causing us to reevaluate what we're doing and sometimes redesigning what was going to happen. We underestimated the costs of almost everything, including the licensed remediation specialists, the expenses involved in the DEP's voluntary remediation program, and some construction costs as well. This may be particular to our area in sort of central West Virginia, very rural here. We don't have a lot of contractors. The contractors we have, we're not interested in bidding on prevailing wage jobs, which at the time, this fell under the prevailing wage guidelines. Just too much paperwork, too much hassle for them, so we had to find out of area contractors. And the jobs were relatively small, so we didn't get a lot of interest from these out-of-town contractors, and I think that caused the prices to be elevated above maybe what they would have been otherwise. So despite these things, we've ended up with a property that was badly blighted, a black eye in the town, abandoned, dilapidated building. Now there's a very nice property with a good-looking building on the entrance to town, so it has really helped the town's overall environment. In addition, we now have a successful privately owned campground operating on the edge of town, which was a needed amenity. Some people were upset when this individual decided to kind of steal our ideas to do a campground, but it's really better to have a private entity operating a private business than the town having to be responsible for it. So we take that as a win as well. And now we've got a building and a nice property that gives us an opportunity to do some things we might not otherwise have. So it's really been a positive experience overall, despite the fact that it's been dragged out and there have been a lot of missteps along the way. That really concludes what I have, and I think we have plans to take questions at the end, so we can move on.
Okay, Gary, I do have a couple of questions that have come in that are specifically for you, and there's one that I think will be better at the end, but I want to go ahead and ask these while we're talking about Webster Springs. The first one is, there's several parts. So if the property was abandoned and being used as a dump site, why was it necessary for the municipality to purchase it instead of using eminent domain to capture it? So that's the first part.
The property was owned by a large landholding company, and when I say it was abandoned, the building was abandoned. The property, they still paid their taxes on it. There was no legal method as far as a tax sale, that type of thing, to take the property. So the property had to be purchased from this large landholding company.
And was there any attempt to collect remediation costs from the previous owner?
There was not. That was discussed, but the owners that had, well, the railroad, of course, from years ago, but then the sawmill that had been there in the, I think, 70s and 80s was out of business. Company no longer existed. The current property owners basically purchased the property in an already contaminated condition, so they were not responsible for adding to that contamination, so I believe they could not have been held responsible for that as well.
Okay, and the final question is, what was the total cost of the redevelopment? A simple question.
Yeah. Okay, I do have something on that. We have spent $274,000 on purchase and renovation of the building to date. A total of $165,000 on environmental remediation costs, and $11,000 for various planning grants and that type of thing.
Great,
So
thank you very much.
About $450,000.
Great. Well, thanks, Gary. We're going to move into the Berkeley Springs project, and I do have one other question that is broader that I'm going to save for the end. But please continue to share your questions as people are speaking. I am watching those. All right, Sally.
All right. Thank you, Carrie, and hello, everyone. Gary, I really did enjoy your presentation and amazed how similar our mistakes and successes were. And I'm going to start out by talking about what were our 7 lessons learned, and you'll see there's a lot of similarity from what Gary has told us. And then my colleague John McCracken will talk about some of the more specific details of the actual depot renovation. So we'll go to the first slide, Carrie. As you'll see, I'll go through each one of our lessons learned and tie it into how we got there, what mistakes we made and didn't, and I'll come back to the end and summarize our 7 big learns. Next slide, Carrie. I think it would help to set the stage. Those of you that have not been fortunate enough to have come visited us in Berkeley Springs, let me explain. Just like Webster Springs, we have a number of names and sometimes confuse everybody, but also make projects more complex. First off, the town of Bath is our local municipal government. Less than 700 people, less than 100 people vote. And although we didn't have 7 different mayors like Webster Springs did, during our project we did have a change of leadership in our town council. And so you have this ownership, big P, little p political games that you have to deal with, and I'll talk about that. Secondly, most of you all know us as Berkeley Springs, and that's actually our postal name, and that's the name that is our branding name for our tourism, our historic areas. So generally and broadly, we call ourselves Berkeley Springs, but as we say, that's really not a place, it's a place of mind. The third level of government is the Morgan County government. Morgan County government and the county commission is located in the town of Bath in Berkeley Springs, and our county is about 17,000, and we have a 3-county elected commissioner form of government. So one of the things that we learned early on is these kinds of projects cannot exist unless we really establish strong partnerships and we figure out how we can get various entities of government to collaborate together. They don't naturally and always do that, nor do they always collaborate among themselves because of the political dynamics in local, municipal, and county government. In our particular case, volunteers were the key. All of these projects would not have happened without volunteers in our community stepping forward and sort of being the bridge and the project manager. And so, for instance, in this case, I am a volunteer as well as John McCracken, and our whole team that's working on this project are volunteers, community volunteers with expertise in the area. I'll get back to that more in a minute. Next slide, Carrie. The history of our depot project, very similar to what Gary has shared with us, is it evolves and develops over time. So while we're talking about the train depot rehab and reuse project specifically, the second part of the project really is the whole issue of the CSX 2.2 acre lot that was donated to us that was in need of remediation, which shaped how and what we could do with our project. And the third component of this is the project that is the North Berkeley Rail Trail, which is currently under design and we hope to get to construction. And we're using the depot and the lot as the trailhead to the North Berkeley Rail Trail. Now, the whole reason this project started was our goal was to jumpstart the economic development of the north end of Berkeley Springs. Berkeley Springs and the actual town of Bath is about a 10-block historic district, and the north end of our area was not getting business or development and was somewhat blighted in many areas. The lesson learned here is that for any of this to happen, and Geary made this point, you really need a vision and a plan. And we did a lot of community involvement, a lot of it with the help of the Brownfields organization and Carrie's colleagues, and to try to get a sense of what the community wanted to do about the north end and what we wanted to do about the train depot, the remediation on the lot, and a rail trail system. So while we started out more than 10 years ago with a vision and a plan, it has evolved over the time. So you always have to be ready to rethink and revisit what your comprehensive plan and your long-term plan is, and continue to involve the community. Next slide. Change is hard. Boy, when you start messing with people's communities, you'll find out where all of the snakes are hidden and the interests lie. And so it was very important that we involve the community, as Geary has said. Some of the tough issues that we are still dealing with and haven't always still resolved is the whole use of the reuse of the building. Geary indicated they had the same issue over time, reuse and vision changes. In addition, there are people in every community that will argue about the use of the existing limited resources, whether it's money, time, and what other priorities. So whenever you engage in a project like this, there's always going to be the naysayers that you've got to try to reach out to and build some consensus. We've mentioned the political agendas, both little p and big P, and elections when you have a town, county, and state government, and political transition is always an important issue to deal with. And in our case, we have multiple organizations that have sometimes competing agendas and sometimes mutually agreeable. Because we have the Historic Landmark Commission and we're a historic district, there's a lot of issues and concerns about historic preservation and the nature of our community. We've got very active environmental organizations like the Warm Springs Watershed organization. We work closely with the Chesapeake Bay Trust Foundation, and so there's the environmental issues to protect our environment, as well as working with organizations like West Virginia DEP and National EPA and Brownfields on how we can improve our existing environment, not just protect, but improve it. And then, of course, we have the tourism and our local businesses that all have a stake in what is happening. So we have spent a lot of time and effort in identifying who are the key players. You need to do that up front and then work very hard to get their buy-in, their input, and make sure they're involved every step of the process. We have open monthly meetings on the status of the process. We're very lucky our local hometown paper, the Morgan Messenger, runs regular stories about what's happening, and so I think that's critical. Next slide. These are complex projects, and what we discovered that the more you get into these, the more expertise you need. We're lucky we have a strong community volunteer effort in our community, and we have a lot of retirees that have really specialized expertise. So finding the experts in your community and engaging them in the task force and in the efforts, I think, is critical. We're fortunate on our committee on these projects. John, my colleague here, is a retired federal highway engineer. We've got a retired environmental engineer that used to work for the company as an international consultant on environmental issues. We've got a retired Army Corps of Engineers landscape architect who is my co-chair and colleague on all these projects. And then we have on the depot project a current National Park Service design and interpretive expert, We've got historic preservation folks, and the list goes on and on. So you got some experts in your community. Reach out, find them, engage them, and they will be thrilled to volunteer their expertise. In addition, it's been invaluable to find the organizational experts and the funders to make these projects real. We can't say enough good stuff about all of the work that the Brownfields staff has provided us. Our Region 9 group has been outstanding. We've worked with Chesapeake Bay Trust, which has funding money because we're in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, working on green grants and through the EPA. Of course, SHPO is critical when we're talking about the historic areas. And of course, a major funder has been the Department of Highways. So all of those folks have provided expertise and knowledge to us that's been really critical. And finally, Gary and I, we were talking earlier, finding the right contract is critical to make or break your program. Many of us have found that in a project we've had to switch contractors for a variety of reasons. So the time and effort, and get expertise if you need it, to select your contractors will be time well spent. Next slide. These are complex projects, and you don't think so. Let's just rehab the existing train depot, and it's, the more you get into it, the more you find it is a complex project. And so knowing how to manage these complex projects, making sure you know who's in charge. Is it the political leadership? Is it the organizational structure? Is it the chair of the EDA? And even though there's somebody in charge, there's also 10 more players who think they are. So having clear project management skills, holding yourself to timelines and schedules, knowing your cash management issues, and making sure your project is well done with inspection and sign-off, we found is a necessary issue. So if you don't have a good project management group in your community, go to your community college and take some classes. It will save you a lot of time and money in the end. Next slide. Boy, the community expectations are all over the lot for these kinds of projects, and those of us trying to deliver them are always under the gun. And the old adage, you know, always under-promise and over-deliver is the mantra you have to do, because expectations do ride high. In addition, always have a plan B, because your original ideas and funding and budget oftentimes will take substantial reevaluation. One of the examples Gary gave, and we're certainly finding out, the environmental remediation costs were a huge shock to us that had not been involved in remediation efforts before. And we thank Patty and all the people at DEP, as well as Patrick Kirby and Anna and all the people at Brownfields, for trying to educate us and walk us through some of that. But keeping a good communication plan, keeping everybody apprised is critical. And hey, just know up front, it's at least 2 times the work, 3 times the money, and 5 times the time. None of us assumed these would be 10-year projects, and yet that's what they end up from the beginning to the end. Next slide. I think the exciting thing about being involved in these projects is they do accomplish to jumpstart a community involvement, community caring about its history and culture and environment, and thinking big about what we could do beyond just this one small project. So I encourage all communities to get involved, build on the resources and skills that you start with a small project. And we've discovered the more you do, the more you learn, and the more you learn, the more you do. And so I do think I'd like to close my section with the lesson learned. Success does breed more success. Never miss an opportunity to look at the next opportunity. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, John.
Good morning. Again, my name is John. I'm a retired civil engineer. I worked in local, state, and federal government, and I got involved in this project about 7 or 8 years ago. The first slide is just a picture of the depot when it was first underused in 1915, 1920 time frame. It was built in 1915. This photo is from 1920, I believe. Next slide. The plaque in the lower right corner of the slide indicates the National Register of Historic Places designation for the building. The upper left corner photograph is of the building before we started renovation a couple years ago. The primary purpose of the, I say renovation, I should say rehabilitation. Under the U.S. Department of Interior guidelines for historic preservation, you have to decide whether you're going to renovate, rehabilitate, or preserve. We decided to rehabilitate, and that gives us more options as far as use of the building in the future. The building has a terracotta roof, which is the primary primary feature which made it historical to begin with. That roof itself was not leaking too badly 7 or 8 years ago, but over the course of time and waiting for this project to mature, the roof did start to leak, and the interior of the building suffered tremendously. The roof cost about $500,000 just to replace that in itself because of its special construction needs. We were very lucky. We hired a very good consultant out of Morgantown, the Mills Group, to do our design and construction management. And we lucked out in 2015, excuse me, getting ahead of time. We hired a contractor to do the roof that was very much an expert in terracotta roof construction. In fact, they had done a number of construction projects in the Washington, D.C. area for a number of historic buildings in D.C. itself. So that helped us quite a bit. Next slide. This is just a slide of the exterior of the building from our rehabilitation plans. I should also note that we were fortunate in that one of our volunteers found the original drawings for the construction of the building at the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum in Baltimore several years ago, so they helped make it as a good base plan for reconstruction of the building. The building is rather small. It's roughly 75 by 30 feet in diameter, in rough dimensions. The next slide shows the interior of the building. It may be hard to look at on screen here, but again, it's just, I guess if you get the copy of this after offline, you can blow these up to larger viewing point. If necessary, I can provide better plans for people who want to see more detail of the building. But I think really now we're talking about how we got to where we are today. Next slide. This is an air photo of the building. In the very left center of the photograph, you'll see a target over top of the depot building itself, and that shows the lot on the corner of the U.S. Route 522 and William Street in Berkeley Springs, also town of Bath. I guess the key thing here is CSX donated the land around the depot to the town and the county, primarily because of a political deal, a good deal that Governor Manchin, now Senator Manchin, did back in, I think, 2008 or 2009, where he traded some other land on West Virginia property for CSX to donate this property to the town. And part of the deal with CSX was for CSX to remediate the contaminated soil of the lot to a certain extent. There is a problem of time. We waited probably for 3 or 4 years for the remediation process to be approved by both CSX and DEP. I can't point a finger at who was the culprit for taking the longest, but it took a lot longer than we all anticipated. We all hoped for it to take a year or two, but it took about 4 years for approval of the remediation of the lot before the town could actually go to construction on the building itself. I guess where we are right now is, as Sally mentioned, we don't have a use of the building in mind other than perhaps a visitor center and several other possible uses for meeting places, etc. We have completed the exterior building renovation rehabilitation as of November of last year, 2015. We just got a new grant 2 days ago from the state, which will enable us to go ahead and do interior rehabilitation, hopefully this year and early next year, and be completed by sometime in 2017 with the total building rehabilitated for use of the town. Cost of the total project will be right around $1 million, give or take 10%. Right now it's at $900,000, but I anticipate it'll probably be more like $1.1 million by the time we finish the project in 2017. I think that's all I have for now. I guess we take some questions.
Great, thank you so much. I do have a few questions that have already come in, but please feel free to keep those coming as you think of them. I have some thoughts on this first question, but I want to give you guys a chance to answer first. Typically speaking, what is the ownership of these properties? How would anyone interested in rehabilitating these structures go about determining the status of the property?
I'll start. In our case, the town owned the actual depot building. CSX owned the 2.2 acre lot surrounding the area. As John indicated, political leadership was most helpful, specifically Governor Manchin and our local delegates working with CSX to facilitate the donation of the lot. So finding who owns it and then figuring out what's the best strategy to get it donated and or purchased.
In Webster Springs case, the property is owned now by the town. It was previously owned by a large landholding company which had purchased a lot of former railroad property when the railroad was going up for abandonment several years ago. So this was a small portion of a large tract of land that they had purchased.
And so I'll just add that for most of these train depots, the owners tend to be railroad companies because they are depots. Sometimes this can be a challenge, especially if there is an active rail line near it, because then the company still needs to have access to that rail line, and so it may be more difficult for them to be able to donate. But if a line is abandoned, a lot of times you can, it's not easy, but you can get them, you can work with that. As far as determining ownership of any property, not just a depot, but any brownfield property that you might be thinking about, that is a service that the Brownfields Assistance Center can help with. We do that a lot. We also do a lot of work helping folks not just determine who owns it, but then helping to bring that owner to the table to start a conversation. So you can visit wvbrownfields.org, our contact information, and reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help with those kinds of questions.
Carrie, let me just add, this is Sally Marshall, and I want to say to anybody out there or anybody you're working with is, yes, the project is daunting in getting ownership, but you got to start. You heard Geary and Webster Springs say, and we in Berkeley Springs kept sort of saying, oh, it'd be great to do this renovation, but how do we get the land, and maybe CSX? Well, just start doing it. Get a plan, talk to your experts, talk to Brownfield, and start the process, because it will take a long time, but if you don't start, it'll be another 20 years before you can do anything. So don't be intimidated. Jump in and do it.
I think that's a great note. And I have to say that I did not prep Sally to talk about how great the Brownfield Center was throughout her presentation.
Hey, your work spoke for itself.
Our next question is, can you, I think this is for both of you, both groups, can you discuss a little more about how you engage the community and how other communities can successfully engage their stakeholders?
Yes, I'll start. We identified early on that we needed community involvement and buy-in. Otherwise, projects like this get sniped from the outside and are setting themselves up for failure. So we started by our task group committee identifying who were the critical stakeholders in our community, that if they weren't behind the project, it would be doomed from the beginning. So we did a major outreach identifying who were the key organizations, leaders, political leaders, philanthropists, and naysayers, and literally working that list, holding community meetings, enticing organizations to share their ideas and work together. And I would say you have to work that as an important critical item in any project. We also, I'll give another plug to Brownfields, we also used the Brownfields staff and their skills to host a couple of visioning sessions and meetings. And we also have in our own community some expertise on meeting facilitation. So we're able to do outreach on a regular basis, and it's important.
I think here in Webster Springs, it's kind of simple. We, of course, we talk to stakeholders and people we think should be involved individually, but we just hold a big dinner at the fire hall, give people a free meal, and invite them to come hear plans for whatever, and we normally get 100 people or so show up. So feeding people seems to be have a big impact.
Yes, meals always work. And that's how we involve some of our local churches early on, is asking them the women of the church, to host the dinners in the church hall. So finding ways for people to help the project and accomplish your objectives is a good way to get buy-in.
That's great. I think also when you're starting out, one thing that I tell a lot of my communities is to go where people already are. So I think the churches are a great example. If there are places that people are already sort of congregating, no pun intended, then that's a great place to start to get some input. So if there are events and festivals that happen in your town and you want to start getting the word out, if you start there, somebody else has already gathered all of those people there, so that's half the work. And you can reach those people at that point and then get them into your fold, and then continue to engage them. And I think that ongoing continued engagement is key, because if people feel like you just asked them one time and then you never told them or cared anymore, then they're not going to stay engaged. So you want to make sure that you're following up with folks throughout the course of the project. And as Sally said, that is another service that the Brownfield Center can help with. Go ahead, John.
I was going to say, one thing that we did in Berkeley Springs is we used the local newspaper, the Morgan Messenger, to help tell some of our story from time to time. And other regional newspapers have also contacted us in the past as well. So I think there's one TV station may have been there, at least one TV at least. So getting it out in the press makes sure that people who are not actively politically in town can at least see what's going on and maybe join in when they see the news.
And we're also using social media. For our current streetscape construction project, we've got a whole communication plan, including websites, local community, FaceTime, putting out a weekly status report, and always on the agenda of the Chamber of Commerce monthly meeting and the EDA meeting, the town council meeting, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that's a great point. So a related question is, Sally talked a little bit about people who think they're in charge. How do you determine who is in charge when the project is volunteer-based and everybody thinks they are in charge? And if you have any examples, then that's useful as well.
Well, I think you need to have a clear idea of your organizational structure, and remember that everybody feels they have to be in charge of something. So in our case, certainly the people that are, quote, in charge are the politically elected leaders who are the sponsors or whatever, since it's their property, etc. So they are certainly included. But we also know they have other busy agenda issues, and this is not their sole focus. So we have established an organizational structure. The town council, by ordinance, authorized the Streetscape Committee to engage in these projects, to raise funds, to do grant work, and oversee the projects. And we report to the town council and give them updates. It's a matter of building trust being transparent, open, and honest, making sure you're accountable to the political leadership because they have to feel the heat, making sure you know when to ask permission or when to give them information. And so the political leadership is in charge, but the day-to-day project management activities are done by a established task force recognized by the local government. And actually 2 of our projects are both county and town. The property is owned by one entity, the town owns the other, funding comes from 2 different sources. So this collaboration that we've been able to establish is very important because town and county doesn't always see eye to eye or work together or are of different political issues.
Gary, did you run into anything like that with your project?
No, really, it was a town project, so the mayor, town council, and then myself as economic development director was sort of brought into that. So that management was not a problem. It was a bigger issue making sure that the community stayed involved in it and that it didn't just become something that the mayor was doing.
I think that's important as well, and I think that you're hearing about some very formal sort of organizations and ways of managing that, and that is one very good way to do it, but it is not the only way. You won't always have that formal sort of management structure, and that's okay. You may have an all-volunteer group, and I think that Sally's initial point about making sure that everyone is involved and everyone is contributing really helps with that, because ultimately people just want to contribute and help to make the project a success. And I think that Sally talked a lot about finding experts in your community, and I think that there are experts in more things than you realize, and that you may be an expert in things that you don't realize. That's one of the purposes of this program, the Redevelopment Expert Exchange, is to recognize and encourage others to recognize their own expertise. And I think when you sort of divide and conquer like that, it can help to mitigate some of those issues of people feeling like they need a higher level of authority. Not always, but sometimes. We have one more question in just a few more minutes. I'm wondering if, let me just glance at this one more time. So have you run into any issues with people questioning the use of, in the case of Berkeley Springs, for example, almost $1 million of public money for a building where the use is not completely identified, and if so, how do you sort of explain or justify that expense to your naysayers?
Yes, that was one of the issues that I said is one of the lessons learned. Remember, there's always competing priorities. And yes, there's a certain number of people in our community that said, you spent what? On why? And that's brings up a couple of the issues. One is that's why you have to have some community buy-in and ownership that this is in the best interest of the community and is not just a fanciful use. I also remind you, while the project was that amount, we have been very successful as a community of getting a lot of grant monies and donations. So we are a very small community with very limited resources. And so doing a 20% cash match is even tough for us on grant money. So we find 100% grant monies, we find 80-20 grant monies, we find donations, and we find organizations and corporate sponsors to help participate in. If you show success and they see how this can improve their property values and the economic development of our tourism-related business town, then people start seeing what's in it for them. So yes, it's still controversial, but there's enough support, and we point out that it was not fungible money. We could not redirect this funding to support the school program, for example.
And I think the experience here is somewhat similar. There are still people that say, well, that was a lot of money spent for very little bang for the buck. But I think when you have environmental cleanup, You know, the property being cleaned up and the building being renovated was a beautification type effort. The actual environmental cleanup was for subsurface contaminants, and you know, people just don't really understand that property may have issues that can cause health concerns. Our property is right on the banks of the Elk River. Things can leach into the river and contaminate it. So it's sometimes a difficult task anytime you're doing environmental cleanup to convince people that the money has been well spent, because they don't see necessarily the potential damage and harm that could be done.
I think that's a great point. Well, that's our final question, and we're right at our time, and I really appreciate our panelists' time and effort in putting together this and sharing their stories and lessons learned with us. And I really appreciate the great questions we got from you guys. As I said at the beginning, this has been recorded, and we will share that on our website early next week. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to the Brownfield Center. And I'm sure that if you would like to follow up with these guys, if you reach out to me, then I can help connect you, and I'm sure they'd be happy to chat offline. I did want to say there was one other thing. For more information on the Berkeley Springs project, there is in your window, there's a handouts section, and there is a Word document that you can download that has some more background on the depot and where they came from and where they're going. And that will be available with the recording as well. And with that, I thank you very much, and I hope to see you at a future redevelopment expert exchange and at the Brownfields conference in September. Thanks a lot.